The gunshot that killed Eleanor's father echoed through the canyon long after the bullet found its mark. But it was the knife that came afterward that carved the jagged line from her left temple down to her jaw, a scar she would carry like a brand for the rest of her days. She survived that terrible night in 1873 when bandits raided their homestead outside Prescott, Arizona Territory. But the 15-year-old girl who crawled from beneath her father's body was not the same one who had laughed at supper just hours before. Now, 3 years later in the spring of 1876, Eleanor Marsh had learned to angle her face just so, to let her dark hair fall forward like a curtain, to turn her head when strangers looked too long. She had learned that people saw the scar before they saw her, and she had learned to make herself small because of it. The stagecoach rattled into Tombstone on a Tuesday morning, dust swirling in golden clouds as the driver pulled the horses to a halt outside the Grand Hotel. Eleanor pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat and peered through the window at the bustling street. Tombstone was bigger than she had expected, fuller of life and noise and possibility. Men in dusty boots walked alongside women in fine dresses, and somewhere a piano played badly but enthusiastically. She had come here to start fresh, to take a position as a seamstress in Mrs. Hartwell's dress shop, to build a life where no one knew what had happened on that terrible night. She adjusted her bonnet carefully, making sure it shadowed the left side of her face, and gathered her carpetbag. The driver opened the door and offered his hand, which she took gratefully. Her legs were stiff from 2 days of travel, and she nearly stumbled on the step down. That was when she saw him. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate sparingly, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore a dusty hat pushed back on his head, revealing brown hair that needed cutting, and his shirt was open at the collar despite the respectability of the town around them. He had been walking past the stagecoach, but he stopped when she stumbled, his hand reaching out instinctively, though he was too far away to catch her. She steadied herself and felt her face flush hot with embarrassment. "You all right, miss?" His voice was rough but kind, touched with something that might have been Texas in its drawl. "I am fine, thank you." Eleanor turned her head to the right, away from him, and busied herself with her bag. He tipped his hat and moved on, but she felt his glance linger for just a moment before his boots carried him down the wooden sidewalk. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she had not noticed the way his shoulders filled his shirt or the gentleness in that rough voice. She had not come to Tombstone looking for anything but safety and work. Mrs. Hartwell's shop was 3 buildings down from the hotel, a narrow storefront with a painted sign that read "Fine Dressmaking and Alterations" in careful gold letters. Eleanor pushed open the door, and a bell chimed overhead. The shop smelled of fabric and lavender sachets, and sunlight streamed through the front window onto bolts of calico and muslin stacked against the walls. "You must be Miss Marsh." The woman who emerged from the back room was round and pink-cheeked, with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and spectacles perched on her nose. "I received your letter. I am so glad you have arrived safely. The journey from Prescott can be treacherous. Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Hartwell." Eleanor kept her face angled away, a habit so ingrained now that she barely noticed she was doing it. "Let me show you the workroom, dear. We have 3 orders that need completing by Saturday, and I confess I am behind. Your references said you were skilled with detail work." Eleanor followed her into the back room, where 2 sewing machines sat beneath windows that faced the alley. Fabric covered every surface, and a dress form stood in the corner draped with half-finished blue silk. This was good. This was safe. She could lose herself in the work, in the precise movements of needle and thread, and build a quiet life in this noisy town. She rented a small room above the bakery, just wide enough for a bed and a washstand, and spent her first week learning the rhythms of Tombstone. She woke to the smell of fresh bread, walked the 2 blocks to the dress shop before the sun was fully up, and spent her days bent over fine stitching until her eyes ached. Mrs. Hartwell was kind but exacting, and Eleanor was grateful for both qualities. In the evenings, she returned to her room, ate simple suppers, and read by candlelight until exhaustion pulled her into sleep. She saw the cowboy 3 more times that first week. Once outside the general store, where he was loading supplies into a wagon. Once riding past on a rangy bay horse, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Once standing outside the Silver Spur Saloon, talking with 2 other men about something that made them all laugh. Each time, Eleanor looked away quickly, but not before noticing small details. The way he moved with an easy grace. The scar on his right hand, pale against tanned skin. The fact that he wore his gun low on his hip, but did not carry himself with the swagger of men who wanted to be noticed for it. On Sunday, Mrs. Hartwell insisted Eleanor accompany her to church services. "You will want to meet people, dear. Tombstone may seem rough, but we have a good community here. Good people trying to build something lasting." The church was a simple wooden structure at the edge of town, painted white and crowned with a modest steeple. Inside, benches were packed with miners and merchants, ranchers and their families, women in their best dresses and men with their hair slicked back and their faces scrubbed clean. Eleanor sat beside Mrs. Hartwell in the 3rd row and kept her eyes on her folded hands. The preacher was a thin man with a booming voice who spoke about redemption and second chances, about how the Lord saw not the outside but the heart. Eleanor tried to listen, tried to let the words settle into the hollow places inside her, but she felt exposed here among all these people. She could feel eyes on her, could imagine the whispers. That new girl, the one with the scar, wonder what happened to her. After the service, Mrs. Hartwell introduced her to what seemed like half the town. Eleanor smiled and nodded and kept her face angled just right, and she was exhausted by the time they stepped back into the sunshine. She was turning toward the street when she heard his voice. "Mrs. Hartwell, good morning." Eleanor glanced up and found the cowboy standing 3 feet away, hat in his hands, looking respectfully at her employer. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just green but flecked with gold, and there were fine lines at their corners from squinting into the sun. "Mr. Coleman, how lovely to see you. Have you met my new seamstress? This is Miss Eleanor Marsh, just arrived from Prescott. Miss Marsh, this is Mr. James Coleman. He has a ranch about 10 miles north of town." Eleanor offered her hand automatically, angling her face to the right. "Mr. Coleman." His hand was warm and calloused, his grip firm but brief. "Miss Marsh, welcome to Tombstone." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that made her glance at his face before she remembered not to. His eyes met hers directly, and she saw no pity there, no curiosity, just a straightforward kindness that made her throat tight. "Thank you." She withdrew her hand and looked away. "Mr. Coleman brings his mending to the shop sometimes," Mrs. Hartwell said cheerfully. "Though I confess he is not our most frequent customer. Cowboys are not known for their concern with fashion." James smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Eleanor's heart skip. "I admit I am more concerned with what is practical than what is fashionable, ma'am. But I do appreciate good work when I find it. Miss Marsh is very skilled. Perhaps next time you are in town we will have something ready for you. I look forward to it." He nodded to them both, settled his hat back on his head, and walked away toward a hitching post where his bay horse waited. Eleanor watched him go before she could stop herself, watched the way he moved like he belonged to this land, like he had grown up from the red earth and rocky hills. Then she caught herself and turned quickly away, but not before Mrs. Hartwell gave her a knowing look that made her cheeks burn. The days settled into a pattern. Eleanor worked long hours at the shop, her fingers flying through hems and tucks, buttonholes and seams. She had always been good with a needle, but now she poured everything into the work, all the things she could not say, all the feelings she could not express. Mrs. Hartwell praised her often, and gradually customers began to request her specifically for the most delicate work. James Coleman came into the shop on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks after she had arrived. Eleanor was alone, Mrs. Hartwell having gone to the mercantile for thread, and she looked up from the wedding dress she was beating to find him standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Afternoon, miss. Is Mrs. Hartwell in?" "She will return shortly. May I help you?" Eleanor stood, smoothing her apron, and kept her face turned to the right. "I have a shirt that needs mending if you have time. Caught it on barbed wire, and it is about the only decent one I own." He held up the garment in question, a dark blue work shirt with a long tear down the sleeve. "Of course. I can have it ready by Saturday. I would appreciate that." He stepped forward to hand her the shirt, and as he did, the light from the window fell full on her face. Eleanor turned quickly, but not quickly enough. She felt his gaze, felt the moment of recognition, and waited for what always came next. The stare, the questions. The careful politeness that was somehow worse than cruelty. But James just held out the shirt and said, "Got herself tangled in the fence line. Scared both of us pretty good before I got her loose." The shirt was the least of my worries. Eleanor took the shirt, confused. He was talking about a horse, she realized, just continuing the conversation as if nothing had happened. As if he had not seen. "That must have been frightening," she said carefully. "It was. She is a good mare, though, smart as they come. Just got spooked by a rattler and did not look where she was going." He paused. "I know how that feels. Getting spooked and not looking, done it myself more times than I can count." There was something in his tone, something gentle and knowing that made Eleanor look up at him. He was watching her, but not the way others did. He was looking at her eyes, not at her cheek. Looking at her like she was a person, not a tragedy. "Saturday, then," she said softly. "Saturday." He nodded, settled his hat back on his head, and turned to go. At the door he paused. "That beadwork you are doing there, that is beautiful. Whoever is getting married is lucky." "Thank you, Mr. Coleman." He left, and Eleanor stood holding his shirt in her hands, her heart beating strangely fast in her chest. She told herself it meant nothing. He was just being kind. But kindness was a rare enough gift that she let herself hold onto the feeling a little longer than she should have. She repaired the shirt that evening in her room, her stitches small and precise, reinforcing the tear so it would be stronger than the original fabric. She did not let herself think about why she was taking such care, why she chose thread that matched exactly, why she pressed the shirt carefully when she was done. James came back on Saturday, just before closing. Mrs. Hartwell had already gone home, and Eleanor was tidying the workroom when she heard the bell. She came out to find him waiting, and he smiled when he saw her. "I hope I am not too late." "Not at all. I have your shirt ready." She retrieved it from the shelf behind the counter, wrapped in brown paper. "I reinforced the seam as well. It should hold now." He unwrapped it and examined her work, turning the sleeve to the light. "That is fine work, Miss Marsh. I cannot even see where the tear was." "That is the goal." He pulled coins from his pocket, but Eleanor shook her head. "Mrs. Hartwell set the price at 25 cents. He counted out the coins and added an extra quarter to the pile. "For the extra reinforcement, that is not necessary. It is to me. You did more than I asked, and I appreciate it." He pushed the coins toward her, and she took them because refusing felt like it would make more of the moment than it was. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman." "James," he said, "if you do not mind." She did mind, because names made things personal, but she found herself nodding anyway. "James, Eleanor," he asked, and she nodded again. Her name sounded different in his voice, softer somehow. He gathered his shirt and turned to go, then paused. "There is a dance next Saturday night at the community hall. Most of the town goes. Music and food and such. I was wondering if you might like to go, with me, I mean." Eleanor felt the words hit her like cold water. A dance with her. She could picture it too clearly, the stares, the whispers, standing on the edge of the floor while he realized his mistake. "I do not think that is a good idea." "Why not?" Because she would embarrass him, because people would talk, because she had learned not to want things she could not have. "I am not much for dancing. Neither am I, if I am honest. But the food is always good and the music is tolerable and I would like the company." He met her eyes and there was no pity there, just hope. "I would like your company." She wanted to say yes. The word was right there, pressing against her teeth, but fear held it back. "I do not know you, Mr. Coleman." "James," he corrected gently, "and that is fair. But that is why people go to dances and church socials and such. To get to know each other. Unless you are not interested, which is also fair, and I will not bother you again." "It is not that I am not interested." The words came out before she could stop them, and she felt her face heat. People will talk. People always talk. That is what people do best, I think, but I am not asking people to the dance. I am asking you." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that made her heart ache. He meant it. He was not asking out of pity or curiosity. He was asking because he wanted to. "All right," she heard herself say. "All right, yes." His smile was like sunrise. "I will call for you at 7. You are staying above the bakery, I heard." "You heard correctly." "Then I will see you Saturday, Eleanor." After he left, Eleanor stood in the empty shop and wondered what she had just agreed to. She touched her cheek, feeling the raised line of the scar beneath her fingers, and tried to imagine a whole evening with people looking at her. Looking at them together. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was James's smile, and that made the fear a little easier to bear. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Eleanor worked on a green dress for the mayor's wife, hemmed 3 pairs of trousers for a mine foreman, and repaired lace on a christening gown, and through it all her mind kept drifting to Saturday night. Mrs. Hartwell noticed her distraction and finally asked about it over lunch on Thursday. "You seem far away, dear. Is everything all right?" Eleanor hesitated, then said, "James Coleman asked me to the dance on Saturday." Mrs. Hartwell's face lit up. "Did he now, and you said yes?" "I did. I am not sure why." "I am, Mrs." Hartwell patted her hand. "James Coleman is a good man. His father had the ranch before him, built it up from nothing. James took it over when his parents passed 5 years ago. Fever took them both the same winter. He has worked himself nearly to death keeping it going, and he deserves some happiness. As do you. People will talk. Let them. People talked when I married Mr. Hartwell. I was a widow with 3 children, and he was 10 years my junior. They said it would not last. We had 22 happy years together before he passed." She smiled, and there was sadness in it, but joy too. "Do not let fear steal your life from you, Eleanor. You have already lost too much." Eleanor wanted to ask how Mrs. Hartwell knew what she had lost, but the older woman's eyes were knowing and kind, and Eleanor realized she did not need to ask. Mrs. Hartwell saw her, really saw her. Not just the scar, but the grief beneath it. "I am frightened," Eleanor admitted quietly. "That is all right. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is doing the thing anyway." Saturday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Eleanor bathed in the washroom behind the bakery, using the last of her good soap, and washed her hair until it shone. She had one nice dress, a soft gray cotton with black trim that she had made herself 2 years ago. It was modest and well-fitted, and she had embroidered tiny flowers on the cuffs in black thread. She put it on and stood before the small mirror on her wall, tilting her face this way and that, trying to see what James saw when he looked at her. The scar was still there. It would always be there. A thick, ropey line that pulled at her skin when she smiled, that turned pink in the cold, that marked her as damaged. She touched it gently, remembering her father's face in the lamplight, remembering the laughter before the gunshots, remembering the blade and the pain and the darkness after. She had survived. That was supposed to be enough, but most days it did not feel like enough. She was pinning up her hair when she heard boots on the stairs. Her hands trembled as she fastened the last pin, and she took a deep breath before opening the door. James stood on the landing, hat in hand, wearing clean black trousers and a white shirt that looked new. His hair was damp and combed back, and he smelled like soap and leather. He looked at her and his eyes widened slightly. "You look beautiful." Eleanor felt her face flush. "Thank you, you look very nice as well. I clean up all right when I try." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His arm was solid beneath her hand, and she could feel the warmth of him through the fabric of his shirt. They walked through the cooling evening toward the community hall, and Eleanor was painfully aware of every person they passed. She felt their stares, heard the whispers that followed them like shadows. But James just walked steady beside her, pointing out things about the town, telling her stories about the buildings they passed. The general store where old Mr. Patterson still refused to stock canned goods because he said they were unnatural. The boarding house where a prospector had once found a gold nugget in his soup, though no one could figure out how it got there. The livery stable where the blacksmith's daughter had taught herself to shoe horses and could now do it faster than her father. The hall was already full when they arrived, lit by dozens of lanterns that cast a warm glow over the crowd. Tables along the walls held plates of food, pies and biscuits, and fried chicken and bowls of beans. A fiddle player and a man with a guitar were tuning their instruments on a small platform at the far end, and people milled about, talking and laughing. Eleanor felt herself tense, felt the urge to turn and run, but James's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "We can leave any time you want," he said quietly. "Just say the word." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and let him lead her inside. They filled plates with food and found seats at a table near the back. Several people came over to greet James, and he introduced Eleanor each time with a quiet pride that made her heart stutter. Some people stared, some did not. Eleanor kept her face angled to the right, kept her hair forward, kept her responses brief and polite. The music started and couples moved onto the floor. Eleanor watched them, watched the way they moved together, and felt a pang of longing so sharp it hurt. She had loved to dance once before. Her father had taught her in their cabin, humming tunes and spinning her around until they were both dizzy with laughter. "Would you like to dance?" James asked. She shook her head quickly. "I told you I do not dance." "That is not exactly what you said. You said you were not much for it. That is different from not doing it at all." He stood and offered his hand. "One dance." "If you hate it, we will sit back down and eat pie." Eleanor looked at his hand, calloused and strong, and then at his face. He was smiling, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes, and she realized suddenly that he was nervous too. That made her brave enough to take his hand. He led her onto the floor as the fiddler began a slow waltz. James placed his hand on her waist, and she rested her hand on his shoulder, and they began to move. He was a better dancer than he had claimed, leading her smoothly through the steps, and after a few moments, Eleanor felt herself relax into the rhythm. The world narrowed to just the two of them, to the warmth of his hand, to the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "You are a liar, James Coleman," she said softly. "You are good at this. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings." His smile was sad and fond at the same time. "She died before she got to see me put the lessons to good use. She would be proud of you now. I hope so. He spun her gently and her skirt flared out. I am glad you came tonight, Eleanor. So am I. They danced 3 more songs and Eleanor forgot to hide her face, forgot to worry about who was watching. She just let herself be here in this moment, with this man who made her feel like maybe she could be more than her worst memory. When the music ended, they returned to their table and James fetched them both cups of punch. They sat and talked, really talked for the first time. He told her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he was trying to build into a sustainable herd, about the creek that ran through the property and the old oak tree near the house where his parents were buried. She told him about learning to sew from her mother, who had died when Eleanor was 12, about her father's dream of building a bigger homestead, about the books she had read and the places she had imagined visiting. She did not tell him about the night that changed everything. Not yet. But she felt the words waiting, felt the possibility of trust growing between them like something green and new. The evening was ending, people gathering their things and calling their goodbyes when a man approached their table. He was tall and broad, with a thick beard and small eyes that lingered too long on Eleanor's face. She recognized him from the general store, though she did not know his name. Coleman, the man said, his voice carrying a sneer. Surprised to see you here with company, especially that kind of company. Eleanor felt James go very still beside her. Evening, Tucker. Was there something you needed? Just wondering what a man like you is doing with a girl like that, unless you are doing charity work these days. Tucker's eyes raked over Eleanor's face, and she felt her hands clench in her lap. That is a nasty scar. What happened, sweetheart? Someone get tired of looking at you. The words hit like fists, and Eleanor felt her throat close. She stood quickly, needing to escape, but James was faster. He rose, placing himself between Eleanor and Tucker, and his voice when he spoke was low and dangerous. You need to walk away right now. Or what? You going to defend your ugly girl? James moved then, fast and fluid, and suddenly Tucker was stumbling backward, James's hand fisted in his shirt. Listen to me very carefully. You are going to apologize to the lady. Then you are going to leave. And if I ever hear you speak to her or about her like that again, you and I are going to have a conversation you will not enjoy. Tucker's face had gone red, but there was fear in his eyes. Several other men had moved closer, including the sheriff, and Tucker seemed to realize he was outnumbered. Fine. Sorry, miss. Did not mean nothing by it. James released him, and Tucker hurried away. The sheriff gave James a nod and moved off, and gradually the normal sounds of the evening resumed. But Eleanor was trembling, the old shame and anger flooding through her, drowning out everything else. Eleanor. James turned to her, his face stricken. I am so sorry. He is drunk and stupid and he had no right. I need to go. Her voice was thin and tight. Please, I need to leave. Of course, let me walk you home. They left the hall and walked through the dark streets in silence. Eleanor kept her arms wrapped around herself, trying to hold in all the feelings that threatened to spill out. She had been a fool to think she could have this, could have one normal evening. The scar was always there, would always be there, marking her, defining her. They reached the bakery, and Eleanor turned to face him, ready to say goodbye, ready to end this before it went any further. But when she looked at James, she saw something in his face that stopped her, not pity, not anger, just a deep sadness. I am sorry, he said quietly. I am sorry that man said those things. I am sorry people are cruel, but Eleanor, please hear me when I say this. He took a step closer, and in the moonlight his eyes were very green. That scar does not make you ugly. It does not make you less. If anything, it proves how strong you are. You survived something terrible. You carry the mark of it and you keep going anyway. That is the bravest thing here. Eleanor felt tears well up, hot and sudden. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Everyone else had looked at the scar and seen damage, but James looked at it and saw courage. You do not know what happened, she whispered. Then tell me, if you want to or do not. It does not change what I see when I look at you. The words came then, spilling out like water from a broken dam. She told him about that night, about the bandits who came demanding gold her father did not have, about watching him die, about the knife that carved her face when she tried to fight back. She told him about waking up alone in the burned ruins of the cabin, about walking 5 miles to the nearest neighbor, about the months of recovery and the years of learning to live with what had happened. She told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, without looking away. When she finished, she was crying, and James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean into his chest, let herself be held. He smelled like soap and sage, and his heart beat steady beneath her ear, and for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor felt like maybe she was not as broken as she thought. I am so sorry, he said into her hair. I am so sorry that happened to you. It is not your fault. I know, but I am still sorry. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, and his thumb brushed away her tears with infinite gentleness. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Eleanor Marsh. And I would be honored if you would let me spend more time with you. No dances required, though I enjoyed that part. Just time, getting to know you if you want. Eleanor looked at him, at this kind, good man who saw her instead of her scar, and felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt like hope. I would like that, she said. His smile was soft and real, and he bent to press a kiss to her forehead, gentle as a benediction. Then I will call on you tomorrow, if that is all right. Maybe we could take a ride out to the ranch. I would like to show you the place. I would like that too. They said good night, and Eleanor climbed the stairs to her little room, and for the first time since arriving in Tombstone, she felt like maybe she had found something more than just safety. Maybe she had found a place to belong. James called on her the next morning with a borrowed buggy and a picnic basket, and they drove north out of town into the rolling hills. The ranch was beautiful in a stark, wild way, with red earth and scattered juniper trees and mountains rising purple in the distance. The house was small but well-built, adobe with a wooden porch and a stone chimney. Behind it, a barn and several corrals held horses and cattle, and a creek ran silver through the property. It is not much, James said, helping her down from the buggy, but it is mine, ours, I mean, my parents'. It is wonderful, Eleanor said honestly. She could see the love in every detail, the careful repairs, the gardens that someone had tended, the way the house sat in the landscape like it had grown there. They spent the day exploring. James showed her the creek, where he said the fishing was good in the summer. He showed her the old oak tree, its branches spreading wide over 2 simple graves marked with wooden crosses. He showed her the barn, where a tabby cat and her kittens lived in the hayloft, and the breaking pen where he trained horses when he had time. They ate their picnic lunch sitting on the porch, looking out at the land, and talked about everything and nothing. I have been alone here for 5 years, James said as they watched the sun begin its descent. After my parents died, I threw myself into the work, did not have time for much else. Did not want time, if I am honest. Grief is heavy and work made it lighter. He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his face. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe being alone is not the same as healing. Maybe I have been hiding just as much as anyone else. Eleanor understood that in her bones. I think we all hide in our own ways. Maybe, but I do not want to hide anymore. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I like you, Eleanor. I like you quite a lot. And I know it is fast, and maybe I am a fool, but I can see a life with you. A real life. Here on this ranch or anywhere else you want to be. I can see you in it, and that is the first time I have been able to see anything but work and survival in a very long time. Eleanor's heart was pounding. James, I like you too. More than I thought I could like anyone, but I am afraid, afraid that you will change your mind, afraid that this is too good to be real. It is real, I promise you this is real. He squeezed her hand, and I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to go. She looked at him, at his honest face and hopeful eyes, and made a choice. She chose to be brave. She chose to believe. Then do not go. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Eleanor felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling, and the sunset painted the sky gold and orange and red, and everything felt possible. The next months were the happiest of Eleanor's life. James came into town twice a week, and they walked together, had dinners at the hotel, attended church services. He brought her wildflowers and books he thought she would like, and she mended his clothes and made him shirts that actually fit. Mrs. Hartwell watched their courtship with pleased eyes and told Eleanor repeatedly that she had been right about James Coleman. But not everyone was pleased. Tucker, the man from the dance, made a point of glaring at them whenever they crossed paths, and other people whispered behind their hands. Eleanor learned to ignore it most of the time, but there were still moments when the stares and comments cut deep. James never wavered, though. He held her hand in public, introduced her proudly, made it clear that anyone who had a problem with her had a problem with him. In August, James took her out to the ranch and asked her to marry him, standing beneath the old oak tree with the sun setting behind him. He offered her a simple gold band that had been his mother's, and Eleanor said yes with tears streaming down her face. They were married a month later in the white church with Mrs. Hartwell and the sheriff as witnesses, and Eleanor wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Standing at the altar, looking into James's eyes as they spoke their vows, Eleanor felt the weight of the past 3 years begin to lift. She was still scarred. She would always be scarred. But she was also loved, and that made all the difference. They moved into the ranch house together, and Eleanor learned the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to tend the garden, to help with the smaller tasks around the property. James taught her to ride, patiently working with her until she felt confident on horseback, and together they explored the hills and canyons around the ranch. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out, and James told her stories about his childhood while she sewed by lamplight. It was not always easy. Money was tight and the work was hard, and there were long days when James was gone from dawn to dusk, and Eleanor was alone with her thoughts. But they were building something together, something real and lasting, and that gave even the hardest days a purpose. In the spring of 1877, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told James over breakfast, watching his face carefully, and he stood up so fast his chair fell over. Then he was around the table, pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are having a baby." Their son was born in December, a cold night when the stars were bright and the world felt hushed and holy. James paced the bedroom while Eleanor labored, and when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, James held him with such tenderness that Eleanor fell in love with her husband all over again. They named him Thomas, after James's father, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's green eyes. Eleanor spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle of him, at the fact that something so beautiful had come from so much pain. The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1879 and another son named Michael in 1881. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily, and James hired on help during the busy seasons. Eleanor took in sewing work when she had time, making dresses and quilts that became sought after in Tombstone and beyond. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and catching frogs and driving her brothers to distraction. Michael was sweet-tempered and gentle, content to sit with his mother and help her in the garden. Eleanor watched them grow and felt a fierce gratitude that she had lived to see this, that she had been brave enough to believe in the possibility of joy after tragedy. On their 10th anniversary, James took Eleanor back to the oak tree where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Hartwell in town for the day, and they had the ranch to themselves. They stood beneath the spreading branches, older now but no less in love, and James took her hand. 10 years, he said. 10 years since I first saw you step off that stagecoach. You looked so scared, and I wanted to tell you that everything would be all right, but I did not know if it would be. I did not know if I could make it all right. You did, Eleanor said softly. You made everything all right. We did together. He reached up and touched her face, tracing the scar with his thumb. I still remember the first time you let me see this, really see it. You were so afraid of what I would think, and I was afraid you would never believe me when I told you that you were beautiful. I believe you now. Good. He kissed her, slow and deep, and Eleanor felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first night at the dance. I love you, Eleanor Coleman. I will love you until the day I die, and if there is anything after, I will love you then too. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for seeing me, for always seeing me. They went back to the house and spent the afternoon together, talking and laughing and making love in the sunlit bedroom. And Eleanor thought about how far she had come from that terrified girl hiding behind her hair. She had learned that scars were just proof of survival, that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it, and that love, real love, saw past the surface to the heart beneath. The years continued to unfold. Thomas left for university in San Francisco when he was 18, determined to become a lawyer. Sarah married a rancher from the next county over, a good man who could match her spirit, and they built a home just a few miles from her parents. Michael stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father, and eventually took over the day-to-day operations as James and Eleanor grew older. Mrs. Hartwell passed away in 1889, and Eleanor wept at her funeral, remembering the kindness of the woman who had given her a chance and become a friend. The dress shop passed to Mrs. Hartwell's niece, but Eleanor still visited sometimes, still took on special projects when asked. Tombstone changed over the years. The mines began to play out and people moved on to new boomtowns, new opportunities. But the Coleman Ranch remained, steady and enduring, a testament to hard work and stubborn love. James and Eleanor grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands developing the aches and pains of age, but their love only deepening with time. On a warm evening in May of 1901, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Their grandchildren played in the yard, Sarah's children and Michael's oldest daughter, and their laughter rang like bells in the twilight. 25 years, Eleanor said, leaning against James's shoulder. 25 years since you asked me to that dance. Best decision I ever made. His arm came around her, solid and warm. Well, second best. The best was marrying you. Flatterer, truth-teller, he kissed the top of her head. You know what I think about sometimes, that day I brought my shirt in to be mended. I almost did not stop, I almost just kept riding, but something made me turn around, something told me I needed to meet the new seamstress. Fate, Eleanor said, maybe or maybe just luck. Either way, I am grateful for it every single day. Eleanor thought about the girl she had been, the one who had survived horror and rebuilt herself piece by piece. She thought about the scar that she had hated for so long, the mark she had tried to hide. She still bore it, would always bear it, but it no longer felt like shame. It felt like a badge of honor, proof that she had endured and overcome. James had helped her see that, had helped her learn to hold her head high. "I am grateful too," she said, "for you. For all of this, for being brave enough to say yes. You were always brave, you just needed someone to remind you." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky. Inside the house, lamps were being lit, and soon they would go in for supper, surrounded by family and love and all the ordinary miracles of a life well lived. But for now, they just sat and held each other, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Eleanor touched her cheek, feeling the familiar raised line beneath her fingers, and smiled. The scar was still there. It would always be there. But so was the love and the life and the future she had never thought she would have. And in the end, that was everything. Thomas came home for Christmas that year, bringing with him a woman he wanted them to meet. She was a teacher from San Francisco, bright and kind, and Eleanor liked her immediately. They were married the following summer, and Eleanor stood beside James and cried happy tears as their oldest son began his own journey. Michael married in 1903, a sweet girl from Tombstone who had grown up knowing the Coleman family. The wedding was held at the ranch, beneath the old oak tree, and Eleanor thought about her own wedding day and how young they had all been. Now there were grandchildren running everywhere and gray in her hair, and lines on her face that came from smiling, and it was all so much better than she had ever imagined. Sarah had 4 children eventually, and Michael had 3, and Thomas and his wife had 2. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter when the family gathered, which was often. Eleanor taught her granddaughters to sew, passing on the skills that had saved her life once upon a time. James taught his grandsons to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals in their care. There were hard times too. A drought in 1904 that killed half the herd and nearly broke them financially. A winter fever that swept through the valley and took several neighbors, though the Coleman family was spared. The inevitable aches and sorrows that come with living. But through it all, James and Eleanor faced everything together, their bond only growing stronger with each passing year. In the spring of 1908, they celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. Eleanor was 60 years old, and James was 62, and they had built a legacy that would outlast them both. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, they walked out to the oak tree one last time. 30 years, James said, echoing their conversation from so long ago. 30 years, and I still cannot believe my luck. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that remained despite the years. I used to think that night the bandits came was the worst thing that could ever happen to me, and it was terrible. It took my father and my innocence and so much else. But if it had not happened, I would not have come to Tombstone, I would not have met you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I feel the same. All the hard things that brought us here, all the pain and loss, it was worth it to find you. He pulled her close, and they stood together under the stars, the same stars that had watched over them for 3 decades. Do you remember what you said to me? Eleanor asked. That first night when Tucker was cruel? I remember everything about that night. You said my scar was the bravest thing there, that it proved I was strong. She looked up at him, this man who had given her everything, who had seen her when she could not see herself. You gave me my life back, James. You made me believe I was worth loving. You were always worth loving. Always. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks, one of them tracing the scar as he had done 1,000 times before. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Coleman, the very best thing. They kissed under the oak tree, under the stars, and Eleanor felt the same joy and wonder she had felt the first time. Love did not fade, she had learned, not real love. It just changed, deepened, became something richer and more complex. The passion of youth became the steady devotion of age, and that was its own kind of beautiful. James passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1912, with Eleanor beside him and his children and grandchildren nearby. He was 66 years old, and he had lived a good life, a full life. Eleanor held his hand as he slipped away, and though her heart broke, she was grateful that she had been there at the end, that he had not been alone. She continued living on the ranch, cared for by Michael and his family, and she found comfort in her grandchildren and her sewing and the quiet rhythms of the land James had loved. She missed him every day, missed his laugh and his touch and the way he had always made her feel safe. But she also carried him with her in everything she did, in every decision and every moment of joy. Eleanor lived another 8 years, watching her grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. She taught them all the same lessons James had taught her. That courage was about showing up, that scars were nothing to be ashamed of, that love was the most important thing in the world. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the man he had been, about how he had saved her life in all the ways that mattered. On a warm spring morning in 1920, Eleanor woke in her bed and knew somehow that this would be her last day. She was not afraid. She had lived a long, full life, longer than she had any right to expect. She had loved and been loved, had raised children and grandchildren, had known joy and sorrow and everything in between. Michael came to check on her at noon and found her sitting in the rocking chair by the window, looking out at the land she had called home for over 40 years. She was smiling, and in her hands was an old photograph of James taken on their wedding day, young and handsome and full of hope. Mama. Michael knelt beside her, and Eleanor looked at him with eyes that were tired but content. I am going to see your father, she said softly. Tell everyone I love them. Tell them to be brave. Tell them that scars are just proof that we survived. Those were her last words. She closed her eyes with that smile still on her face, and she slipped away as gently as a sigh. They buried her beside James under the old oak tree, and at her funeral, every pew in the white church was filled. People came from all over, people whose lives she had touched with her kindness, her skill, her quiet strength. The Coleman Ranch passed to Michael, and then to his children, and then to their children, and the story of James and Eleanor became family legend. The story of how a scarred woman and a kind cowboy had found each other in a rough Arizona town and built a love that lasted lifetimes. The story of how he had seen past her fear to the courage beneath, how he had told her that her scar was not shame but bravery, and how she had believed him enough to take a chance on happiness. And on quiet evenings, when the family gathered under the old oak tree, they swore they could still feel them there, James and Eleanor, holding hands and watching over the legacy they had built together. A legacy of love and courage and the knowledge that the bravest thing anyone can do is to survive, and then to keep living, and then to open their heart to the possibility of joy despite everything that would try to steal it away.